Today I'm going to be cutting the foam in this Nanuk 995. So in a nutshell, this is a case that's really intended for long guns. It comes with uncut foam, so you can cut it to size based on what your needs are. And I'm just gonna walk you through my process for how I approach things. So some basic tools that I recommend is actually gonna be just a utility knife. Make sure your blade is nice and sharp, or you got some spare blades, and then something to mark with, so you can use a marker. I actually use some tailor's chalk because it has a pretty fine edge. It looks like a guitar pick, but it's chalk, so I can mark things, make some nice lines. And the cool thing about the tailor's chalk is that it just wipes away when you're done. On the blade, whatever you use, you want to make sure that the blade can go the full depth of the foam. Obviously, if you have to make two cuts, it's going to get a little messy. And depending on how things go, I may also opt to use this hot wire foam cutter just to clean things up as well. But it's definitely lower level of effort to just use the utility knife. Okay, so just opening the case up, you will see that we are greeted by just a blank slate. You do have some keys because this case has built-in locks, and you have some literature showing the Nanuk line. So very cool there. But like I said, you are presented with a blank slate. So now the fun part, you can take your unloaded firearm and lay it where you think you're gonna want it to go and just kind of play around. So I'm gonna be making this for my custom 14.5 because I think this deserves a case. I think it would also be kind of useful to have a kind of a utility slot that'll be big enough if I want to opt to put a handgun in here. I run the Safariland setups to where I kind of just want the holster to go with it. I have multiple that I may switch out, so depending on the range day, I may just grab a whole Safariland setup to just plug into my belt that goes in a separate range bag. Then all my guns are in one place. Somewhere in this case, I want room for my thermal clip-on, so I'm just gonna set it kind of in the corner for now. What I like to do is just kind of lay things out and figure out where they're gonna go. Definitely want space for can in here. I'm just gonna arbitrarily start, like I said, placing things. Now what I like to do is kind of have a rectangular utility slot somewhere in my cut cases for general purpose items. So I'm gonna just loosely put a sling here for now, just to kind of keep an eye on the real estate we're using up. Now I also think it would be helpful to cut the case to have magazines. So I think I'm gonna do like 3 magazines here. Those can go a little closer to the edge of the case because they don't really need to be protected. As far as the can goes, I don't know if that's gonna start getting too cluttered, and this is where you can kind of play around. So personally, I think that's looking about where I want it. And just a quick tip to keep things level, what you can do, just take a tape measure and just kind of mark things or measure things. So this side of the magazine is 1 inch roughly to that foam, and this side is also relatively, pretty close to 1 inch. Point being, it'll keep things nice and straight. If you have OCD and you don't want to cut the foam tilted, well, this is one way to kind of help you with that. So this is just my simple way of keeping things relatively square. Once you get everything positioned and you're happy with it, this is where I bring out my chalk, a tailor's chalk. And what you want to do is get a relatively tight line to what you want to cut so that you don't have too loose of a fit. And with this tailor's chalk, you can see that I don't have to press super hard, and it leaves a decent line. Making sure I'm tracing things reasonably well to where that line is going to be fairly defined. Now if you want to leave a gap to where it's easier to grab things, that's kind of at your discretion. I like to have the foam fairly tight. Now you can see that sometimes you get curved lines. You can use a straight edge and kind of straighten things up. Now when you get to your actual rifle or firearm in the case, there's gonna be a lot more curves. You wanna avoid overly sharp bends. You wanna try to keep things as smooth as possible. So I kind of just go with the general outline. I'm not trying to get every single little contour, and it's still gonna look pretty good. So I'll probably try to round this when I'm cutting. So just keep that in mind. It's okay if I go, honestly, for me, straight across where this buffer tube is. It'll give me kind of a purchase when I want to get that out of the case. And just making sure I got a reasonable outline. And I'm relatively happy with that. I'm going to go ahead and fill in some of the spaces where I didn't quite trace good enough around that optic region. Like I said, I just kind of want a general purpose utility slot, so to make it easier, I'm just gonna grab this cardboard box that I have, because it's roughly the width of that handgun I want to make a cut for. I want to leave myself a little future-proof real estate in case I swap the cans out and it's maybe a little longer. Same thing, I really want to make sure, since it's a rectangular cut, that it's relatively square. I'm gonna scoot it over, get a little closer to the edge of this foam, maximize the space in here, connect those lines. Now we have a decent rectangle. And for the pistol, honestly, what I'm gonna do is probably just do one big box, because what this will do is let me tuck some magazines there with the pistol. And if I throw the whole holster in there, then it'll keep things from banging against each other that I don't want to bang against each other. So now that we have things mostly mapped out, what I like to do is just clean things up, because once you cut it, there's no going back. So I just use what I can as a general straight edge. So just cleaning up some of the lines that don't look the best. Since I am using chalk, it is as easy as just getting a damp rag, and if you want to undo some line, I mean, you can just basically erase it. It's not going to hurt anything, just to where it's very clear where you are going to cut. If you want to get really tidy, so this is exactly 2-inch line apart there, 2-inch line there, just making sure things are generally square. But otherwise, I'd say this is pretty good. Obviously, you can place things back, make sure it's exactly the way you want them before you start cutting. So this is a case that has 2 layers of foam. So what I'm gonna do is, most of what I'm putting in here may not necessarily need the second layer. We're gonna cut the first layer. The flashlight, for example, here, that may be a second layer cut. So I adjust my blade to be just over the depth of that first layer of foam. There may be a few nicks to the layer below, but it's the second layer. It's not really gonna show up too much or really hurt anything. And then I just kind of pick a corner. We'll start on some of the less intimidating spots. So I kind of just start nice and slow. I go to where that depth is. And then I find if you just take your time, kind of do some light saw motions, it's going to be very important to use a nice sharp blade. And then follow along your lines. So when we meet at that corner, I just kind of make sure it is truly cut, and then I'll turn the blade around the other way and just work my way to the other corner and repeat the process. Where I like to start with these easier cuts. So this is going to be that magazine slot, something square, not complicated, get a feel for the foam. And then I just kind of yank it out. If anything's caught, I don't recommend you tear it, just kind of pull it back and just kind of finish off. Since I set that blade depth just shallow, it may not go through all the way on the bottom. The good thing is, a lot of this stuff is not going to be visible from the top side. Okay, so reasonably straight. You can then test your cut. So this is what we traced for. And overall, I'm pretty happy with that fit. Okay, so that is the layer 1 cut. You can see what I had in mind for some extra magazines there with the handgun. So I think at this point I'm pretty happy with the overall layout. There's maybe some future space here, maybe some additional real estate here. I left a little bit on both sides of this can in case I ever want to swap cans. Also, I left some intentional room for the muzzle device because if that changes, I want to make that future proof. If I ever use a higher sitting laser, then obviously you know, we got some real estate there. So it's a little bit future proof, but for the most part, this is very much designed around this particular rig here. Really, the only thing I still want to accomplish here, besides maybe cleaning up some of this foam, is trying to get this to sit lower. And that's because that flashlight is there. So do it the simple way of drawing a line where that top foam line is, and then where that flashlight sits under it. That's kind of the general region, that light. Now, if we want to get fancy, because we definitely have the depth now for that light, but we could cut this piece of foam down the middle, because the light doesn't need that much depth, and this will still leave some level of padding. So I'm just going to take half of that depth, tuck it back in there. It should be pretty well retained. So now with that flashlight slot cut out, put the rifle back in the case, and hopefully it's evident to you guys, but it is sitting a lot more flush. This barely protrudes. I'll just check and make sure the case closes without me even having to force it down. So I don't think there's any need to cut things down further. Everything is sufficiently padded. I'm not forcing that foam to compress overly hard to where things are going to be bouncing against the hard walls of the case itself. For example, if you don't like some of these frayed ends here, then you can get these hot wire cutters, and you can just basically, using this resistance heated wire, you can just melt off and basically straighten some of that foam. Now you can see it is smoking, so I recommend you do it in a well-ventilated environment. This foam just melts away right at the second you touch it, and it'll straighten up and clean up any of those edges that are giving you a little bit of heartache if you have some knife fray. But you'll see it'll just peel things off, and you can do it to your heart's desire until it's as clean as you want. Now it's only going to be as straight of a cut as you can hold that wire, so just keep that in mind. You might make it worse, you might make it better, but just letting you know what tools exist to clean things up even further. So there you have it. This is how I personally cut my foam on cases. Just keep in mind the real estate that you have to work with, kind of thinking of things to future-proof it, like maybe different muzzle devices in the future, different suppressor lengths, and where you may want to put accessories like magazines, slings. So this is, like I said, my pro tip for you guys is a general purpose slot. So something like slings, I can drop in an extra flashlight that's on a QD mount, you name it. This is kind of my dump section. I could also just remove, if I don't need the handgun to be in here, then I could remove that, put some ear pro, whatever. Sky's the limit. You got a lot of real estate to work with. This is obviously set up for a single rifle with some bonuses. So that's what I had for you guys today. Hopefully this was helpful. Ultimately, at the end of the day, there is no right or wrong. It's just what works for you, and this is what works for me. So if you found this helpful, then go for it. If you have better ways of doing it, then have at it as well. But thanks for taking the time to stop by and watch this video, guys.